Okay, well, it is 3 o'clock. Welcome, everyone, to our CDLC workshop series. Today, we are welcoming Dr. Brad Johnson to talk with us. He is a clinical associate professor of higher education, as well as coordinator and graduate program director for the MED in higher education here at UNC Greensboro. As a practitioner and faculty member, Dr. Johnson has over 30 years of experience working with student affairs, specifically housing and residence life programs, and higher education environments, 24 years of which has been as a UNCG Spartan. Dr. Johnson's research interests include LGBTQ issues within student affairs and higher education, residence hall environments, and graduate students' interests in and preparation for the field of student affairs in higher education. Dr. Johnson currently serves as coordinator for the UNCG LGBTQ Education and Research Network, LEARN, as well as a member of the Gender Diversity Working Group and the Chancellor's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee. Dr. Johnson is a frequent facilitator for Safe Zone and Trans Zone workshops and has been successful in helping to establish the Queer Caucus, a group for UNCG faculty and staff who identify as LGBTQ+. And so welcome, Dr. Johnson, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Hello, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces out there, especially some former students out in the audience. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and we will get going. All right. Can everybody see my screen okay? I've got to always have the Zoom balance over here. All right. So again, thank you to CDLC for inviting me to talk about this topic. I was talking to a few of you before the session started that I had a lot of information on this that I probably could have covered, and having to come off the heels of presentations by Dr. Betez, Dr. Holtzberg, and Dr. Oh crap, just like my name, Dr. Boyce. It's going to be a pretty hard act to follow, but I hope that you'll enjoy this. And we have a special part of this presentation in that I've invited some students to come and talk specifically about their experiences. So let's get started. If you can start by just kind of putting in the chat who you are, that'll kind of give me an idea of who's in the room. I always like to know who is here and who's around, to kind of gauge a little bit about the audience that is here. And while you were doing that, I'm going to go ahead and do a land acknowledgement for UNCG. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that we are meeting on, or that UNCG sits on today, has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst a number of indigenous peoples, specifically the Kiowa and the Sora. Additionally, North Carolina has been home to many indigenous peoples at various points in time, including the tribes or nations of Bear River, Bay River, Cape Fear, Catawba, Chawanoke, Corey, Coronan, Creek, Croatan, Innu, Hatteras, Kiowa, Machipunga, Moritok, Natchez, Nusiak, Pamlico, Shikori, Sarah, Shira, Sisipaha, Shagari, Watery, Weepamoak, Wakan, Yadkin, and the Yeapim. Today, North Carolina recognizes 8 tribes: the Kahari, the Lumbee, the Meherrin, the Occaneechi Saponi, the Halawa Saponi, the Wakamasuan Saponi, and the Eastern Band of Cherokee. So I always like to have people reflect upon the land upon which we are meeting, because it was forcibly taken from indigenous people many hundreds of years ago when colonial settlers came over and started what is now today the United States. So I want to start off by talking or just introducing you a little bit about me, because I think that'll give you some context as to why I'm talking about this topic. So how I identify. So I identify as a white individual. I identify as Southern. So I'm from the South, born raised in North Carolina, cisgender male, first gen college student. So neither of my parents went to college. My mother actually skipped 2 grades and graduated high school when she was 15, but that was back in a time where she decided to get married young and really did not see the need for college. Um, I was the only child, am only child. I was a late in life baby. My mother actually tried to have children for 25 years, and all of a sudden she got pregnant, thought she had low blood sugar, was treated for low blood sugar. The doctor said, "You're pregnant," and here I am. Um, Single parent, latchkey kid. Many of you may not know what a latchkey is, but I was raised by a single mother. And was part of that generation where we pretty much had to take care of ourselves because our parents worked. And so that was her taking a few. I lost her going on 3 years to Alzheimer's, but that picture was taken during one of her birthday celebrations. I am partnered, so I actually met my partner at UNCG. He worked in health services. And so we have been together. We just celebrated 14 years. I'm a fur baby daddy. So I've got my 3 cats and my 3 dogs, and we have 3 aquariums, but I'm not going to put all those fish up there. And I identify as a gay male. So that's a little bit kind of background about me, and I'll be touching on some of these as we kind of move through the discussion. So I felt like we really need to talk about who LGBTQ plus people are in order to be able to understand how to best support and mentor them, especially our students. And so it would not be a student, I would not be a student affairs professional, higher ed professional, if I didn't throw some kind of theory out there for you. So I tend to kind of enjoy or operate more from Daugelli's theory. And that is because it is a little bit more fluid. It's not a stage theory. So it's not that in order to get to this stage, you had to have gone through the stage beforehand. There will be some of these stages that individuals may never actually have to go through. But this is kind of more of a more comprehensive theory that I think takes into a lot of the environmental factors that some previous theories before this did not take into consideration. So I'm just going to quickly go through this to kind of give you an idea of what your students may be going through, depending upon where they fall when they enter college. So there's a exiting heterosexual identity. So that is coming to the realization that they are not heterosexual, that they may identify as, and for purposes of this, Daugelli used lesbian, gay, and bisexual. And we'll talk about transgender in just a second, but they're exiting that identity of, I may not be straight, or I may not be a heterosexual individual. And then they move to developing kind of a personal LGBT identity status. So they start to come into knowing what it's like to be a member of the LGBT community, and kind of starting to dive into some of those constructs and everything about what membership entails. And then they move into kind of developing a social identity. So what does it mean to not only identify internally as being LGBT, but also start to do some outwardly facing things? Becoming an LGBT offspring, it's kind of one of those areas that some people may encounter, may not. Becoming an offspring is essentially the fact that the individual has to come out to family members, friends, chosen family members, if you will. And so that also is a major milestone or major phase for them. and we'll talk a little bit about that, because some individuals do not have a good coming out experience with family members. Depending upon their status or their age or so, coming out could entail being kicked out of a home, could result in homelessness, could result in their education not being paid for. I will give you a brief example. So when I came out to my mother, now my mother and I were 40 years apart. Like I said, I was a oops baby. Like I didn't know I was able to get pregnant, and I got pregnant and had a child when I was 40 years old, kind of situation. So we were already kind of a generation apart. When I came out to my mother, she actually asked me, she called me Robert, which is my first name, so I knew I was in trouble then. And she said, "Robert, are you gay?" And I said, "Yes." And when I tell you that in the span of 30 minutes, I experienced all the things that I had heard other friends say that they had gone through with their coming out stories. My mother cried. She passed out. She brought up the Bible. She brought up AIDS, HIV. She brought up me losing my job, all those things within the span of 30 minutes. So I left that day not feeling the best. And I essentially told her as I left that I was the same individual walking into the house as I would be walking out, except for the fact of who I would choose to spend my life and have experiences with. And so that kind of segues into developing an LGBT intimacy status. So this is where individuals start to have relationships or so that are not heterosexual, that they start dating, they start having serious relationships, and then that all emerges into kind of entering into an LGBT community. So what is it like to be openly LGBT? What is it like to maybe not have some of the uneasiness or some of the anxiety that they previously had? And so Bilodeau took Dalghelly's frame and essentially layered it with trans identity. And so you'll see here exiting a gendered identity, developing a trans identity status, developing a social identity. So they layered it over with Dalghelly's experience, who really did not look at the trans experience. And so let me stop, because I know that I'm throwing out terms and everything, and I'm assuming that everybody may be on or at the same level, but do we generally know what I'm talking about when I say LGBTQ plus? So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, two-spirit, if you're talking about Native American, Indigenous, First Nations culture, queer questioning. And then a lot of people put the plus on there because if you really spelled out all the identities that could be represented, you'd have a really long string. So I just want to kind of take a moment just to make sure that we're all kind of operating on the same page. And to know too that lesbian, gay, bisexual deals more with sexuality, romantic orientation, everything. Transgender deals more specifically with gender. And so sometimes people conflate the fact that they're all lumped together, that they are really all the same, and that's not the case. You're talking really about two different concepts when you're talking about sexuality and when you're talking about gender. So I thought it was important to kind of put the context of what LGBTQ plus individuals are going through in America at this point. So there was a recent report that said that there's 5.6% of US adults, so approximately 18 million, that identify as LGBTQ. This is actually an increase from when this survey was conducted back in 2017. If you look at just the majority of LGBT, and this did not put Q on there, Q for queer is sometimes an umbrella term, but it's still kind of assumed within the LGBT moniker. So if you look at just that LGBT group of Americans, over half of those identify as bisexual. So 24, almost 25% identify as gay. You have almost 12 identifying percent identifying as lesbian. You have just over 11% as transgender. And then there's a little bit over 3% that chose another term other than what was offered by the survey. What has really become a surprise for a lot of people is that 1 in 6 adults in the Generation Z grouping identify as LGBT. And again, within that subgroup, bisexuality is the vast majority of how people identify within that group, but coming in at 72%. I thought it was interesting to note that women are more likely than men to identify as LGBT, and that women are more likely to identify as bisexual. So again, you see kind of that bisexual trend, so to speak. And I know on the advertisement it said the invisible minority, and so that's a term that's sometimes also used for Native American indigenous culture, but we say invisible because unlike race and even some ethnicity groupings or so, people can't necessarily always look at someone and know that they identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. Within the community, bisexuality is actually the invisible majority. A lot of people don't realize the extent to which LGBTQ plus Americans identify as bisexual. And bisexuality can sometimes come under some scrutiny because people who don't really understand bisexuality may just say, oh, that person's confused. They want their cake and eat it too, kind of. They just can't make up their mind. And that's really not the case. And then lastly, involving education, what I thought was interesting was that 5.6% of college graduates and 5.7% of college non-graduates, there was no meaningful educational difference between them. So education really did not have a distinguishing factor when you're talking about LGBTQ plus Americans. And I just took some screenshots of this just to kind of put some of those statistics in kind of more perspective. More, if you're a visual person like I am, sometimes it's easier to see this. And so these give you among LGBTQ plus the subpopulation, and then among all of US adult populations. And so you can kind of see some of those figures that I just went over as they compare with the US population in general. And then this is a good breakdown. I also thought this was interesting about generations. So you can see that Generation Z, which is what we have in our colleges right now, that 15 point, almost 16% of them identify as LGBT versus that population or that percentage being decreasingly lower as you go up through the generations. So there are less millennials, less Gen X's, which is what I am, baby boomers, and traditionalists. And then this is just the breakdown of those generations by what they identify as. And so the Williams Institute at the UCLA Law Center is a great resource for, they do a lot of research, a lot of advocacy work for the LGBTQ plus community. And so I wanted to kind of show you some of these graphics. They look at a lot of things like healthcare, economic, education, and all. This first one, with the way they had broken up the US population, you can see that the majority of LGBTQ plus identified individuals live in what they call the South. And that's about a 16 state territory region. Keep this in mind because I'm gonna come back to it in just a second. So majority of the people identify in the South as LGBTQ plus. If you're looking at education wise, this is basically showing you that LGBT people may intentionally pursue higher education as a way to buffer themselves against discrimination in the workplace. So research has shown that LGBTQ plus individuals typically are a little bit of overachievers when it comes to education, and that kind of aligns with this in terms of trying to buffer their discrimination experiences that they may have within the workplace. Economic insecurity, again, you can see employment protections are closely tied to economic security and well-being, with non-protective states having people earning less than $24,000 annually. Similarly with healthcare, we know that LGBTQ plus individuals are proportionally at higher risk for some health concerns, not only psychological well-being, which would deal around with depression, suicidal ideation, but also health concerns such as more drug use. So think about more smoking, more alcohol use, more prescription drug abuse. And so this is another thing, and this is where I want you to kind of think about the fact of, we just said that the majority of LGBTQ plus Americans identify or are situated within the U.S. South as the Williams Institute kind of stated. So if you see this national average for social acceptance of LGBT people, you kind of see that it almost splits up the states and territories pretty evenly. This is where North Carolina falls. Now remember, I told you that the South, according to Williams, was made up of about 16-ish territories or so. This is where all of those territories that the Williams Institute said that they counted in the South, this is where they fall on social acceptance of LGBTQ plus people. Note that we have the lowest acceptance in West Virginia, and we have the highest or the most acceptance in DC. But what I think is really curious is, if you notice below that national average line, there are a lot of those southern states that are not very socially accepting of LGBTQ plus people, yet those are the very states where the majority of the population of LGBTQ plus people reside. So kind of keep that in the fact. You've got a lot of people living in a place that's not really accepting of them. And so I wanted to move a little bit into kind of the workplace setting, because we're in the business of educating and helping our students prepare for careers. According to an HRC report in 2018, 46% of LGBTQ workers are closeted, as compared to 50% in 2008. So it's gotten a little bit less. 1 in 5 report having been told or had coworkers imply that they should dress in a more masculine or feminine manner. 53% have had reported hearing jokes about lesbian or gay people at least once in a while. 31% said that they felt unhappy or depressed at work. So again, going back to that kind of health aspect of identifying as a member of this community. And the top reason that LGBTQ plus workers didn't report a lot of these negative things is they did not feel that anything would be done. They didn't think that anybody would really take them seriously, and they really did not want to necessarily hurt the relationships in their workplace. So how does this translate closer to home in terms of North Carolina? So the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, has a state scorecard for every state in the United States. And so this is how North Carolina kind of fared. North Carolina does not support or prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity as it relates to housing, employment, hate crimes, public accommodations, education, transgender health, or anti-conversion therapy. So all these things, all these areas within the state of North Carolina, there are no laws or any kind of assistance or so with with prosecuting acts of discrimination in these areas for LGBTQ plus people. North Carolina partially supports updating the gender marker on your identification documents. So you can do it on your driver's license, but not on your birth certificate. And then North Carolina fully supports marriage equality and other relationship status. So think about marriage licenses being issued and school anti-bullying laws and everything. But as you can see, there's a lot that falls within this red territory that make up a lot of our daily lives and things that we need in order to be successful and to have good experiences in our lives. There's a lot of those areas the LGBTQ plus people really have to watch, and they really have no repercussions if any kind of discrimination occurs within those areas. I wanted to kind of focus it down even more about what our students, LGBTQ plus students, look for when they are deciding where to go for college. And so the Campus Pride, which is based in Charlotte, did a study, and they have a kind of a top 10 list. So an active student organization on campus. So think about, if you're not at UNCG, think about your institutional organization. Is there an organization or subgroup there that represents interests of LGBTQ plus individuals? Out students. So are students out? Do they feel genuinely comfortable being on campus and being in that environment? Out faculty and staff. So my dissertation study was actually on gay and lesbian staff in higher education. And it was prompted primarily by the fact that I observed pretty high ranking individuals at institutions who I knew were gay, but who were not out on their campus. And so my thing was, what's that disconnect? Why do they feel uncomfortable with being out, especially given their position? So are there faculty and staff that are there? Are they being represented for the students? Inclusive policies, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but are there policies on there that actually acknowledge the fact that you have LGBTQ plus students on your campus? Are there visible signs of pride? Do websites reflect that? Do you have a safe zone, trans zone kind of program where allies can get stickers and display? Are there allies from the top down? This kind of goes to my dissertation study. Are there people who identify in the LGBTQ plus community who are in the upper echelons of administration at your institution or organization? Are they comfortable being out? LGBT inclusive housing and gender neutral bathroom options. Again, all about facilities, and we will talk about that in just a second. Is there a center or some kind of office established on your campus? I can't tell you the number of times that people assume that UNCG has an LGBTQ plus center, and I have to inform them, nope. In fact, we don't even have an office that's dedicated to that. We have an individual within intercultural engagement that specializes in that area, but there is no set specific office for the LGBTQ plus community. Is there any kind of academic major or minor that they can take courses in? The attitude and the vibrant social scene on campus, and I would probably argue around the campus in the community. So I just want to offer a few things for your kind of consideration and thought before we move on. So campus climate entails the attitude, behaviors, standards, and practices of employees and students of an institution, particularly those that relate to access, inclusion, and respect for individual and group needs, abilities, and potential. So what we're really talking about with all these is the campus climate. How do students, how do faculty, how do staff kind of engage with one another and set the tone for being able to make sure that the needs are met for everybody who are within that community. Campus climate is the central narrative for many LGBTQ plus undergraduate students, from recruitment to admissions through retention and graduation. So the warmth or chilliness of a college or university environment largely shapes the availability of resources and inclusive policies for LGBTQ plus students. So again, think about your environment and think about, are there policies and processes in place that would come across as welcoming for LGBTQ plus students? Among sexual minority LGBTQ plus college students, research suggests that experiencing heterosexist discrimination can contribute to poor psychological well-being. So we kind of touched on that earlier. Increased drug use, homelessness, increased depression, suicidal ideation. And then what I call the EEOC checklist. So I have people sometimes talk about the gay agenda. And I'm like, it's not really a gay agenda. It's just that we as a community want to have the same protections, the same rights as everybody else. But because, as we saw with a lot of federal laws and everything and legislations, we do not have the same protections as other individuals that fall under, again, that EEOC checklist. So for example, even though UNCG has a non-discriminatory clause in its university statements and everything, that still doesn't protect me from being fired. UNCG, my boss could come to me tomorrow and say, I hear you're gay, you got to go. And that's what a lot of people live in fear of. Again, when I shared my coming out story, that's what my mother was afraid of, that I was now going to lose my job if people found out that I was gay. And some of my suggestions for kind of mentoring and supporting based upon what I've gone over so far is do your homework. I tell my students, it's perfectly all right for you to kind of go to a person that represents a group that you want to know more about, but you need to do your homework. They should not be tokenized or placed in a position where they have to teach you. They can explain or elaborate upon some things that you may have questions on, but do your homework. And what does that look like? Workshops, safe zone, trans zone trainings, ally trainings, whatever they're called on your campus or institution, going to speakers, looking at websites, reading books and articles. Make sure, and also making sure that your allyship is visible for students to see. So do you have a sticker that, like the Safe Zone sticker, that you can put on your office door? Are you able to do something in your email signature? Is your department or organization able to indicate that you are an ally on their directory, so that students and anybody else looking at that automatically know that you have taken some steps in order to better understand where they're coming from as an LGBTQ plus individual. Going back to kind of policies and procedures, take a look at policies, procedures, services within your individual department or office, or even at your institution, and look for things that are what I call sometimes low-hanging fruits, those easy things to kind of change and get the ball rolling. So for us, like admissions applications, does your institution ask a student's sexual orientation or gender identity or expression? Specialized student services, is there that LGBTQ plus center on campus, or is there someone who is full-time, who gets paid to think about program around issues related to the LGBTQ plus community? Information collection. So think about your mainframe systems. For us, that's Banner. How does that technology and everything interact with the different platforms around campus? If a student goes and has their name changed at the registrar's office, does that automatically get uploaded into the system or the platform that you're using within your office or area? Facilities design and renovations. All about, we saw that they look for those gender neutral bathrooms and gender inclusive housing. What steps are being put in place to where when new construction happens, or when gender neutral restrooms, or when restrooms are being built, are there considerations for making sure that gender inclusive housing options are being part of the planning process, or that gender neutral restrooms are being offered, especially in large venues like the Elliott University Center? And then looking at healthcare and counseling facilities. So our staff being trained on the right questions to ask? Are they being trained on how to be able to help or to serve our trans students, our students who are LGBTQ plus? Our intake forms, do they ask for pronouns? Do they ask for chosen names or so? Student insurance policies. Do you have a student insurance policy that addresses the special medical needs of some of our trans students who may need, hormone replacement therapy or other things that most insurance companies, for students at least, won't necessarily cover? Take note of some of the assumptions that you automatically make. So language, I'm a big thing on language. I just heard it even today on TV. So like saying, hey guys, what's up, when it's a room full of women. So not making some of those assumptions, asking about one's partner or boyfriend or girlfriend, making an assumption that it is the opposite sex or gender from you. So I had a call from a telemarketer, and he was trying to get me to come to something. And he said, so what does your wife think about that? And I was like, excuse me? And he said, what does she think about? And I said, well, first of all, I don't have a wife. I have a partner / husband. And second of all, this conversation is now over. And then I proceeded to email that organization and say, you might want to give your callers a little bit of sensitivity training about this, and not have them be, I hate to say it, so narrow-minded or assume something that's not true. Are there academic and curricular resources? So are there those courses out there, queer courses, queer history? Do you have library resources that are available, whether that's like our Intercultural Resource Center in the OIE or in the actual library, Jackson Library itself? Are you utilizing data on student experiences? So those campus climate surveys, ACHA is the college health assessment, American College Health Assessment, which UNCG participates in. Are you looking and pulling data on that to kind of give you a good snapshot of what LGBTQ plus students are going through on your particular campus? And then are LGBTQ plus students being represented at the table? Are their voices being heard? Are their concerns being heard? And that can be either there is physical representation at the table, or are there advocates or allies that are at the table making sure that that perspective is also considered in any decision making that happens? And then remember that the LGBTQ plus identity is really one facet of an individual. We have a lot of students who are experiencing intersectionality. So they're not only identified as LGBTQ plus, but they may also have another marginalized identity that is compounding the discrimination, the harassment, the frustration, the oppression that they are experiencing. So think about an African-American woman who identifies as a lesbian. Think about, a Jewish male who identifies as LGBTQ plus. So just also consider that it is one part of their personality and not the overarching defining facet of who they are. And then do student check-ins, simply asking students, especially if you know that they are LGBTQ plus, if there are national or even local incidents, even within your campus community that are, if there's a hate crime against an LGBTQ plus identified student or so, just doing check-ins with your students to see how they're processing it. How are they feeling about it? Do they still feel safe? Do they need to talk it over with someone? And so that leads to what I call the real stars of this session, which was not me, our student panel. So I was very fortunate to be able to rally up some students across kind of really all levels here at UNCG. So we've got undergraduate students, we've got master's students, and we have a doctoral student. And so I would like to kind of start off by asking them some questions, but definitely leave time for you all to ask questions as well. So I'm going to stop right there because I get into my Southern excitement here and just see if there's any kind of questions or so before we start asking the students. All right, so not seeing anything. Oh. So there was a question about would you have access to the recording? And yes, the CDLC has a YouTube channel that the other sessions have been added to, and this session will be added to as well. So why don't we go around then, and I will ask our student panelists to introduce themselves. So Celeste, why don't we start with you?
Hello, everyone. My name is Celeste. I am a first year in the Student Affairs Administration and Higher Education program at UNCG, and my pronouns are she, her.
Okay, Catherine.
Hey y'all, I'm Catherine Bennett. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a doctoral student in higher education, and I identify as queer.
John Mitchell.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Mitchell Benton. I go by a double first name, John Mitchell, and I also use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm finishing up my graduate degree here at UNC Greensboro in the SAHI program.
Lou.
Hello, my name is Lou, he, him pronouns. I am also a second year in the higher education program here at UNCG. I identify as bisexual and I'm a transgender man.
Isaiah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Isaiah. I serve as an RA here at UNCG, a sophomore and a double major in psych and media studies, and I am also the current head of the LGBT club on campus, No Labels.
And LaShonda.
Hi, I'm LaShonda Souza. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an undergraduate student majoring in political science, religious studies, and history, and I'm very excited to be here today. Oh, and I identify as queer.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can see people's faces over here. All right, panelists. Can you just kind of start off by briefly sharing, kind of what your experience has been as a member of the LGBTQ plus population with respect to being a student in higher education? And that can be the good, that could be the bad, that can be the neutral.
So I can get us started off. So for me, my experience, again, I'm a master's student. I did my undergraduate work at LaGrange College, which is a small private institution about an hour southwest of Atlanta in Georgia. And so I never really accepted this fact growing up in a Baptist household until I got to college, experimentation and trying to figure things out. But I think, it's really extremely important to understand that each individual's experiences are very different. And so where some people may, come out and recognize it a little bit earlier, for me, it wasn't until my sophomore year in college. And so I think that that's a really big thing. But I will say coming from a small institution in Georgia and also being a student athlete was a very different experience than what I've had here at UNCG. So I think that UNCG does a really good job of creating inclusive environments for individuals that identify within the community. But I think that just recognizing that each of those experiences are very different is really important.
Thank you, John Mitchell.
I can go.
Okay.
I was going to say that I came into college pretty stable in my identity, and I found the school to be pretty great as far as in comparison to what I'd heard. At least my standards coming in. I haven't experienced any like outward aggressive discriminatory practices or anything like that, and the school is more inclusive and more intentionally inclusive than what I was expecting. So I appreciate that. But oftentimes, people don't recognize, or no one ever assumes or guesses or even thinks about me being, like a queer LGBTQ person. So like I have to like say that. But yeah, other than that, you know, it's good. It's cool.
I can go next. Um, I really enjoy the fact that there are so many out students here at UNCG. Um, Again, I'm from DC, so it's like I'm used to like people being accepting. Now, of course, there are like a few people that aren't, but whatever. Um, Being here has kind of like taught me that like I'm not really what I thought I was, and that's okay. I came in thinking I was bisexual, then the whole bisexuality versus pansexuality thing happened. Then it was okay, I'll just be queer. Then it was okay, maybe I'm gay. Now I identify as andro pansexual, and I wouldn't even know what that term was if it wasn't for being able to be on a campus where I can like fully express myself and like actually like explore like who I am. And for anyone who doesn't know, andropansexual is just a term that I came up with. It's a combination of two sexualities, pansexual and androsexual. Pansexual is attraction regardless of gender based off of emotions, and androsexual is attraction to masculinity. So me, I'm just attracted to masculinity regardless of your gender.
And as you can see, just like Isaiah shared, terminology, labels, whatever you want to call it, they're very fluid and they change. I often do safe zone, trans zone training, and I am forever having to brush up on new terms that are emerging out there. So it's a continual process. I would like to get to a question that was asked. So do any of you have recommendations that you could make to the admissions department here at UNCG in terms of inviting more LGBTQ plus students to consider UNCG as a place to attend?
Well, as the head of No Labels, the LGBT club on campus, letting them know that the LGBT population here is strong and vibrant, and I believe there are two LGBT clubs, No Labels and Confetti. Yeah, both clubs are actively looking for members, actively like trying to hold events and volunteering. So yeah, like letting them know that like people are here and we're not going to judge you for it.
Thank you, Isaiah. Other thoughts or suggestions?
I didn't hear anything about LGBTQ people during my tour of the school. So maybe mentioning, you know, like Isaiah said, mentioning the clubs during things like tours or the orientations or things like that, because I don't remember hearing anything about any of those things.
I will say as an old timer here, I remember another colleague and myself, the other colleague is no longer at UNCG, but we advocated for going to LGBTQ plus college fairs and representing UNCG and everything. And that got shut down. Of course, that was a couple of administrations ago. So I'm hopeful that maybe that would be something too, because those are and they're run by Campus Pride, and that's one of the resources that LGBTQ plus students really look for when they're gauging, you know, how LGBTQ plus friendly is a college or university, you know, and they have very specific criteria that they are judged upon and rated upon. So I will just say that there has been efforts or suggestions made in the past that have not really gone anywhere. What would you like faculty and staff and administrators or so at UNCG or in general to know about LGBTQ plus students? If you could give them advice or some words of wisdom or so, what would you want to impart to them to help them better understand your lived experiences?
As a student, I'm always looking for little like symbols of like inclusivity when I'm looking at my professor. So like if I see like a sticker on their laptop or like, oh, see something on their bag or something like that, or, you know, something at their door, it's a good sign that where I know I'll feel more comfortable with them. And I just feel more willing to talk to them. So even though it's like you don't have to make a huge point, but just knowing that like people are looking for those things and they want to see that, like, you know, some sprinkling of, you know, diversity and inclusivity in your classroom is really appreciated. And making a point of, you know, setting on like, you know, the syllabus day of making a present, say, okay, well, these are the things I expect from my classroom and I don't tolerate this, that, or, you know, the third, is very valuable and it makes us feel comfortable in your spaces.
I'd like to add to that one too. I would also say that I really loved seeing the initiative. I'm pretty sure through OIE of faculty and staff, allies and those in the community. That was a huge symbolic gesture to that point that you made, LaShonda, that we are looking for those symbols of people that we can go to when we have a question or things that we need to discuss that are specific to the identity. I think on the flip side of that, we're also people, but we have the superpower of having that insider outsiderness, right? We have our own communities for support. And so we don't always need allies to be at the forefront of our support in that regard. But at the same time, those gestures of, yeah, you're welcome here and you're not going to be shunned for your identity and we're not going to tolerate, like you said, LaShonda, specific forms of harm or violence or discrimination are really, really important. I think syllabi are also a great place for those things. I see some faculty members in the audience, like, yeah, you know, just having those messages about diversity and inclusion and acceptance in the syllabi can be a nice resource too.
Yeah, Catherine, and you bring up a good point about, I think it's also important that no matter who you're advocating for or what identity you're talking about, but knowing when you need to walk behind, when you need to walk beside, and when you need to walk in front of, in terms of your level of advocacy, allyship, things like that. And so you don't want to overshadow someone, but you also don't want to leave them behind or not be there to help support or speak up for them.
I will just add something real quick. I love both of the points that were made because I think that when you're able to really like engage with that inclusive like pedagogy and really understand how to facilitate inclusive and safe conversations in the classroom, I think that it really helps to boost the student, like whatever your student learning outcomes are, or for your students to really feel like they can engage and really be vulnerable in the space. So I think that really doing that research on the back end, so that you know how to really have these effective conversations in the classroom, and really in any type of environment can be really important.
So I have a question. How much of your LGBTQ plus identity has been incorporated into the courses that you have taken here at UNCG?
Me personally, it hasn't been much of an impact simply because I'm here for the degree. If it's not going to fit in that degree works, then, you know, I'm sorry, but if we can get it in there, we're going to get it in there. For instance, last year for a GSB credit, I took women and gender studies, literally was like the only dude in there. But I feel like kind of like just reaching off of your question a little bit, because we do have classes that are focused within like LGBT and like women's equality rights, but they're not advertised as much, and then they're pretty niche. For instance, the women in gender studies class was primarily cis white women. And then my intro to African American studies class is reaching off a little bit, but it's intersectionality. I promise there's a method. The intro to African American studies class was primarily African American students. Why is it that we don't promote these classes, the LGBT course, because literally the women and gender studies course is doing fine. But when you look on UNCG Genie, you can see no one's really signing up for the LGBT one. So why aren't we pushing these different classes if our campus is so inclusive to everyone and not just their niche groups?
Thank you, Isaiah. Other thoughts about this? How your identity has been incorporated or not incorporated into the courses that you have been taking? That you have taken? Wow.
I would say, so I'm in the higher ed program like two other folks on the panel, and so LGBT identities are intentionally included in our coursework throughout the process. I think for me as a trans person, I feel like a lot of people talk about me, but not to me. So I think trans identities are a really trending topic in student affairs right now. And I understand, of course, not forcing someone to educate you, but I've definitely offered to people multiple times, like, please talk to me anytime, because I think there's a big difference from the education you get on Twitter and the education you get from a real person that you're actually talking to. And I've had 2 people in 2 years actually take me up on that. Most of the time it's been crickets. So I think there's a difference between like performative allyship, where you know all the buzzwords because you've read them on the internet and you know what to say so you don't get in trouble, and like really taking the time to sit with another person and hear their story.
I think we have time for one more question. So have you had any non-accepting experience at UNCG? And if so, has it been from students or has it been from faculty, staff, or any kind of combination?
Hey, yeah. So I haven't personally experienced anything because I don't play that, but I've definitely heard a lot of my LGBT friends, literally our first meeting that we had in No Labels, I asked them this question. One of them said that her professor continuously dead names her. I had another student, when referring to an RA in another building, refer to the wrong program, not programs, pronouns. And when I told him that's a he insisted, no, that's a girl, and trying to like have that conversation, and like it just wasn't working. Yeah, this is definitely a very LGBT friendly campus. However, we do have a couple of bugs on our campus that simply just don't want to either be respectful or just simply just like can't.
So for those, Isaiah used the term dead naming or dead name, so I put in the chat. That's just when a name is used by an individual who no longer goes by that name. So think about our rosters and how they are very legalistic and everything, and they will have the names on there. But if you are a trans student, for example, and you no longer go by that name because it was more indicative of a former, gender identification or so, then the professor or staff person constantly saying that dead name, so to speak, essentially re-traumatizes our students. All right, I want to I will put my email in the chat. It's just essentially brad.johnson@uncg.edu. But I again want to thank the CDLC for inviting me to come and kind of present. And I love the fact that I was able to get students to come and kind of share their perspective too, because I'm all about the fact of, if you want to know, go to the source. And so if anybody has any follow-up questions or anything, I'll be glad to do that. Just email me.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, for your important workshop on LGBTQ plus identities and mentoring students. And I also want to thank our student panelists for sharing their valuable experiences and perspectives, and for working with us to make our campus community more inclusive. I have just a few announcements. If you'll bear with me, I would like to announce our next workshop, which is going to be a workshop by Dr. Jamie Schissel mentoring and supporting international students. This workshop will be held on April 14th from 3 to 4 p.m. using the same Zoom link. And I also would like to announce our next general CDC, our next general CDLC meeting, which will be on March 24th at 12 noon. I don't know if you can all see that. 12 noon to 1:30 p.m. also on this link. And we welcome everyone in our campus community to join us as we dialogue about diversity in language and culture. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Another workshop all done.